We're good to go. Welcome everyone to our webinar on the new policy on Listeria. I'm Laurent. I'm with Laurence Cambron-Fortin.
Hi.
Thank you, Laurence, for being with us.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Well, we always need experts in the subject to really tackle this hard subject about quality, about the Listeria policy. We got plenty to talk about.
Plenty to talk. Yes.
Yeah. And thank you, everyone, for being with us for such a, let's say, a niche subject that is the regulation towards Listeria. We've got a huge audience from Quebec, Ontario, Alberta, BC, Manitoba, also from all type of background, also with mostly quality people, of course. We've got a ready-to-eat producer, sausage, ice cream producer, smoked meat. We've got salad products. We've got a seafood product also. So clearly, we were able to reach a pretty large, C2C audience to talk about this new subject, what's new with this Listeria policy from Canada that's going to take place and be installed on October 1st.
October 1st, exactly.
Exactly. So without any further ado, we'll start by officially presenting ourselves. So there you go. So I'm Laurent Dallaire. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Innodal. So Innodal, we specialize in the production and development of antimicrobial protein that are produced by probiotic. So at Innodal, we apply those proteins on any type of food product as a kill step for pathogens. So in the case of our main product, Inneo, which is an anti-Listeria solution that you apply on the product and any type of different products sensible to Listeria. It acts as a kill step, and since it's a processing, you don't have to label it. So that's why we know pretty well Listeria, since we worked a lot with to kill it, to really remove them from our food productions. Well, we were pretty confident to be able to provide pertinent, let's say, information about it. I'm from a biofermentation background, and I've done a master's degree in food microbiology. So pretty happy to be here to talk about this new policy. And with Laurent. So what do you bring to the table today?
So I come from a background of pharmaceutical industry. I've been working there for more than 10 years. And like 6 years ago, I made a change to go in food industry, and I really loved it. And that's how I discovered BeWist. And BeWist is a multidisciplinary team, and we do custom-made mandates to help food businesses to build their safety systems. So we can redact and implement. We can also update systems that are already in place. We can act as technical support in the development of scientific validation. We can also do diagnostic and internal audits. That's a few of the things we can do, but the important thing for us is to do custom-made mandates. Every client is special and every mandate is different. So every HACCP plan is different on any food businesses. So that's who we are, and we love it.
Awesome. So as you can see, we're quite, let's say, expert in the subject of the policy and Listeria. As a little disclaimer, we're not CFIA official representative, so it's really our professional take on this new policy. Our goal today is really to flag any difference on the old policy from 2011 to this new policy, highlight what's to come, but of course, like the final decision will always be made by your CFIA inspector, who remains the right resource for the application of the law on your type of product. But here is really to prepare the different companies on what's coming up in the next few months.
Yes, exactly.
Awesome. So first of all, we've got a lot to talk about in this webinar. We're going to talk about the new definition of what's a ready-to-eat product. Coming with that, what's new is all the exemptions. So what type of product and companies are now out of this policy? Also, maybe you're out of the policy with your product or your company, but you still have responsibility, and that's clearly stated in this new policy. The classification of the level of risk, the famous decision tree that helps you go through this classification, how you're also able now to change category to prove that you're in control of your process and the quality of your product, the sampling plan regarding these different categories of risk. One of the new things coming up also is all the protection of vulnerable people. So how do we protect them when we clearly address this type of, let's say, customers? A couple of ambiguities that we've seen and highlighted in the policy because it's new. There's always like new thing and some. Well, let's say we've added a couple of things where there still need to be clarification from the CFIA and our closing remarks. So without any further ado, we'll start right away with Laurence. What's a ready-to-eat food?
So the definition didn't change a lot. So it has been modified to include some more details. So it's food eaten in the same condition as it was purchased. And normally there's no further preparation except washing, rinsing, thawing, or warming. So if we take, for example, the cabbage is whole. So it has not been cut or open. So that's not ready to eat. If you take it to a coleslaw that is really shredded and packaged, this is ready to eat. So that's kind of the big difference. That's kind of easy to understand, but that's the big difference.
Exactly. It's really when you introduce, let's say, a more invasive step, like when you cut, you create a new surface of contact. That's where you get let's say, a higher risk of recontamination, cross-contamination in your product.
I think the biggest difference is in the exemptions.
Right, exactly. And we'll go right away into these type of products. So there's a couple of class of products that are exempted from the policy. We'll go through them. So first of all, any food that have received a processing step. So let's say thermal control of the product that allows a reduction of 5 logs of Listeria in a hermetically sealed package. So typically we're talking about canned food, refrigerated sous vide, retort pouches. That's typical case where this type of product are out or exempted of the policy. We're also talking about hot filled or packaged food. Example of that, maple syrup, jam, melted cheese. So any product where there's like you package and you hot fill. That being said, you really need to control to make sure that it's resealed right after, so there's no risk of recontamination after the filling of the bottle. There's also all the dried goods and dried low moisture food. So in there, we're talking about cereal, bread, pasta, nuts.
Or you think about dried herbs or spices.
Exactly. Just a note about that. So yes, this type of product, when they're, let's say, really sold for the consumer, the risk is pretty low. But from our experience and what we saw, when you work with this product as, let's say, nuts or spices, sometimes they're the source of contamination if you rework them to make a ready-to-eat product. So yes, you're out of policy, but there's still a risk for this type of product. We're also talking about a beverage that does not require storage under refrigeration. So we're talking about alcoholic beverage, a bottle of water typically. So this type of product. We also have raw whole fresh foods and vegetables. So that's they were exempted before in the old policy. I think one thing that is new is now it includes microgreens, sprouts, berries. So that's new because before they were category 1 level of risk, and now they're completely out of the policy.
Completely out, exactly.
We'll go back to that later on in the presentation, but clearly that's a new thing that for this type of product. We're also talking about raw meat, seafood, raw eggs. So anything that is meant to be cooked later on, they're out of the policy. That being said, if you're doing a tartare, a beef tartare, a salmon tartare, so if it's meant to be consumed raw, then it stays in the policy. And when we talk about beef tartare, yes, there is a risk of Listeria, but there's mostly the risk of E. coli. There's also the specific case of live oyster shelf stock. So because basically it's sealed, so there's no risk of, let's say, contamination later on. And finally, any processed foods that are intended to be cooked before consumption. And it's really important that it needs to be labeled as such.
Yes, and the validation cooking, you need to do the validation that you down your count by 5 logs and to write it on the label.
Exactly. And that the instruction is really consistent on the label and on your website. So the consumer really cooked this product. So it's really important for that. The only exemption for this type of product would be sausages like hot dog or smoked sausage. They stay in the policy because I'm pretty sure that historically there is, I'd say, a higher risk that the consumer would consume this product raw. So these products, they stay in the policy and it needs to be treated as such, as higher risk.
Mm-hmm.
Also, so one thing that is new now is not only there's exemption on product, but there's exemption based on businesses. So what we see is that grocery, farm, restaurant. So when we're talking about any product, when we're talking about grocery store or restaurants, basically it's products that are meant to be sold right away and eaten right away for by the consumer. We're talking about buffet, fast food, cafeteria, the caterers, exactly. Yes. They all enter in that type of product. For the farm, so the primary agricultural producer, they're also it's considered with your example of the cabbage that stays whole.
It stays whole, so that's excluded.
Exactly. So it's really for the secondary manufacturer that reprocess the product that the policy would apply to them, but for primary producer, it wouldn't apply for them. We also include into these exemptions in terms of businesses with edible cannabis and natural health product also. So that's the businesses that are now out of the policy. But that being said, it's not that you're out of the policy that you don't have any responsibility, and that's really important.
That's really important because if you are excluded, you should remain vigilant. So all relevant provisions of federal food legislation still applies to these foods, such as preventive controls. So there is no frequency required on your sampling plan, but you still have to do them. So it's really important to keep that in mind. And manufacturers are still expected to implement GMPs and preventive control, as well as environmental sampling and end product testing. So there's a guidance that is available on the website of the CFIA to guide you through your sampling plan. And you also have to keep in mind that if you export to the US, this policy is irrelevant because in the US, there is no categories. You only have category 1.
Exactly. So whatever type of product, the moment that you export a food product to the US, at the border, it's tolerance 0. Like if you have one presence of in your production, well, it won't be allowed to go through the border. And it's a pretty a great hassle to take that look back from the border. So yes, that's the main challenge for any exporter out there. So even if you have a tolerance in Canada, the moment that you export, well, it's 0 Listeria.
Yes, exactly. So if we continue with the categories, as I said, so we have 3 categories. So beginning with the category 1, it's food which supports the growth of Listeria. So I think about like deli meats or hot dogs or meat spreads. So there's something where Listeria lives well. So you have to process monitoring. You have to do your process monitoring, your environmental sampling and end product testing. You have to conduct them very more frequently. So with this new policy, you have to think for the CFIA, you are category 1 and you have to prove that you are category 2A or 2B, because there's this famous tree that we'll see a bit later that will help you guide through these categories. And now it's the responsibility of the operator to determine his risk level. So keep that in mind. And in category 1, as we told, it's like in the US, there is 0 tolerance for Listeria. So if we continue to category 2A, there's a limited potential for growth. So it needs to stay under 100 CFU throughout the shelf life. So I think about like fresh cut fruits or vegetable that have less than 5 days of shelf life. So that's kind of tricky. So we're still thinking about other examples. So if any has some, please feel free to write them in the comment part. So
yeah, because typically category 2A with a product, let's say a shelf life of less than 5 days, it was product made by a restaurant or by grocery stores, because that was the type of category. But now they're out of
they are already excluded.
So yes, it limits the possibilities of what type of product are really in category 2A.
Yes, exactly. And if we continue on category 2B, there's where the growth of Listeria will not occur and the increase will not exceed 0.5 logs. So we think there is a few other physical chemical parameters that you can still think of. So your pH can be, if your pH is under 4.4 regardless of the water activity, or your water activity is under 0.92 regardless of the pH, or you have a combination of both. For the pH, you have to be under 5.0 and on the water activity under 0.94. So that's interesting, but you still have to prove it. So you have to have data to prove it to the CFIA. And then there is still frozen food that you have to consume frozen.
Exactly. So we're not talking about products that are frozen and then thawed and then sold as a fresh product. It's really products that are meant to be eaten.
Yes.
Frozen ice cream is the perfect example of that.
Exactly. Ice cream, or I think of frozen fruits. Or if you think about dips that are under pH 4.4, that's really interesting too, because the producers already know they have to be under 4.4 to limit the growth.
Exactly.
And then we arrive to this famous tree.
Yeah.
I really love that tree. It was really existing.
Yeah. So this tree existed in the old, let's say the old version of the policy. It wasn't in the policy per se. It was in the validation for a category change, but now it's really in the policy.
Yes, because in the last policy, you ask the CFIA which category you are. And then if you wanted to change category, then you go through this tree and with the help of the CFIA. So now you have to do yourself the tree. So it's really interesting.
It's a good thing, because now you're more aware of what's the variables that are put in place to determine like what's your level of risk.
Yes, exactly. So I think it's one of the biggest addition, but I think it's really positive. So if we go really fast on this, because we'll do an example later. So for the major steps you'll have to do, first of all, you'll have to see the physical chemical parameters, and then you see if your shelf life is 5 days or less. Then do you have a processing step, a listericidal processing step that kills more than 5 log of Listeria?
And here we're not talking only about, let's say, thermal process. It's any type of let's say process that kills more than 5 logs of Listeria. So it opens door to new technology that it's not only a cooking step.
No, exactly. Then you have the cooking step, so the thermal processing step that is under 5 logs. So it's the partial step actually. Exactly. And then you have the non-thermal processing step that is under 5 logs. So that's the difference with the box earlier. And then after that, you have to have adequate validation studies to prove that the food will only support a growth of less than 100 CFU throughout the shelf life. And you have to document it.
Exactly.
So that's really interesting, because you can use any technologies. Yeah. You have to validate and demonstrate that it works.
Yeah, so it puts the responsibility back to the manufacturer to show that he's in control, that whatever type of technology you use, well, it works, and the data is there to support those, let's say, those controls, basically.
Yes, clearly, it's really interesting.
And that being so having the tree in the policy, so it allows the manufacturer to be able to change category also. So we'll talk about that right away. So we've talked about studies to prove efficacy, to prove effectiveness of let's say, the control of Listeria in let's say the product. So now with this this policy, you're able to show if you're a category 1 level of risk, you're able to show that you can be category 2, 2A, 2B. Well, then just show us the data. So basically, what you have to do is what we call a challenge test. So a challenge test is you take a cocktail of Listeria strain that you inoculate on the food product at a low level. So we talk about 10 to 30 CFU per gram of food product. And the goal is to see, does the product support the growth of Listeria? So if you can show that there's absolutely no growth of Listeria, so if you inoculate at 10 to 30 and at the end of the shelf life, you're still at 10 to 30, then you could be 2A. But once again, we're talking about the microbiology here, so the variation are pretty high there. So it's, I would say, less realistic in terms of experiment and being able to show it. But if you're able to show that the growth throughout the shelf life is only a 0.5 log, then you're able to, let's say, really have a good file to change category to 2B, which is a game changer in terms of, we'll talk about like what it impacts in terms of gain to change from category 1 to 2B. But if you're able to like support those data, well, it's a game changer. It's one thing to do those challenge tests that needs an expertise to do so, but you need also, like, one of the questions that we get asked so many times is, if I have a portfolio of 50 products, do I need to do a challenge test for each of those products and show the same data? Which wouldn't be realistic at all.
No.
The workload there would be tremendous. So what you have to do is basically do the demonstration on the worst case scenario in terms of product. So any product that have a high pH or a lot of water activity, if you're able to show that in these worst case scenario, you're in control of Listeria, then you're able to apply the same logic to, let's say, best case scenario where pH is lower, where all the, let's say, physical, chemical parameters are more controlled. So if you're able to really provide this rationale of how like those results can apply to the whole portfolio, well, that's what's required from the manufacturer. And one last thing also is that, yes, if you've shown that you're in control in a laboratory environment, that's one thing. But if you've implemented any technologies or a point of control that really allows the population of Listeria to be kept under control, well, those points of control needs to be controlled and validated on site, also on the production side. So you wouldn't, let's say, inoculate Listeria on the production side and theory at the lab part, but you need to show that the critical point of control are really validated, and that it's one thing to use it's an antimicrobial or processing step. It's another thing to use it well regularly every day, each time. So that's the two thing about it, to be able to change the theory. We'll give an example of how it would apply, let's say, a more typical case. So we'll use the case of the cold smoked salmon, which is one of the best case in terms of a product that is more at risk for Listeria, because when we talk about pregnant people, we're always talking about, don't eat any cold smoked salmon, seafood, this type of product. So we'll talk about this example. So in the example of cold smoked salmon, so typically the pH and water activity are quite high, so you would answer basically no to that criteria. Then typically also the rate you eat the food or this product actually has a shelf life longer than 5 days, so no again. Typically those type of product, you don't have a listicidal processing step that kills more than 5 log of the strain of Listeria, so you would also say no to that. You don't have a thermal processing step in a cold smoked salmon.
No,
so
it's cold.
It's cold. So you say no. Then that's what's interesting is that in the case where you have a non-thermal processing step achieving a less than 5 log, and they give specifically the example of a cold smoked, because when you're smoking, you apply, let's say, a couple of antimicrobial compounds due to the smoking step. So yes, there's that step, but typically on a cold smoked salmon, over a period of 14 days, you see the growth of Listeria. You can't really provide any data that support that you're in control of, like there's no growth over 0.5 logs. You would say no to that. The same criteria would apply to the 100 CFU program. So that's why typically a cold smoked salmon is category 1 level of risk. That being said, if you implement a new technology, a new way to process your product, and you're able to show that during the shelf life of your cold smoked salmon, the growth is limited to 0.5 log, then you would change category from 1 to 2B, and that's a game changer.
Yeah, really.
Absolutely.
So for the sampling plan, it's like half of it or maybe more than that. We'll see that a bit later.
Exactly. In terms of what you're able to use as new technology, we'll go to the next slide. So in Appendix C of the policy, you have different technologies or, let's say, processing step that you can use in your process. So, of course, there's food additives. And in the policy, in regulatory-wise, let's say any type of additive that are really, let's say, validated for Listeria to act against Listeria. We got potassium lactate, sodium acetate, sodium lactate. There's 2 other. But the problem with that is that basically it's additive, and typically it's not the kind of additive that you want to add to your list of ingredients. Sadly, it's less quality, it's more marketing. Well, it's not something that you necessarily want to add to your product. But you could add also any additive that has an antimicrobial effect, but you would need to show efficacy once again. One thing that is new also, we in the policy now they talk about processing aid. So of course we'll talk about our technology Neo, which is a processing aid, the same thing. So they promote processing aid as a kill step, a punctual kill step that needs to be added with a couple of different parameters, but can also help control the growth of Listeria. And any post-packaging treatment. So one example of that would be HPP.
Exactly.
Once it's packaged, if you redo a thermal or any type of, let's say, kill step post-packaging, that's let's say other technology can help you really control Listeria throughout the whole shelf life. So these are technologies you can use basically, and it has an impact on the sampling plan. Clearly.
So the sampling plan, if you pass from category A to 2B, as you can see, this table was extracted from the guidance that is available on the website of the CFIA. It's called Control Measure for Listeria monocytogenes in Ready-to-Eat Food. So that's like the Bible for sampling plan. So it will guide you through every sampling plan. So once you determine your category, if you are like category 2A, if you see the first column, you have to sample your surfaces once per month. That's quite a lot.
Yeah.
So if you can prove that you are now in category 2B, you can sample your surfaces once every 6 months. So we know everybody is dealing with a lot of people challenging
to have operator to be able to do those sampling.
Thank you.
Exactly, it's a real problem. So.
It's a real problem for everyone in the industry. So I think this might be a really big game changer if you have to do your sampling plan once a month versus once 6 months. So yes, the validation of the changing category is really costly, I think, so for the challenge test, but at the end of the day, that will be really important for the people working in the plant, actually.
Absolutely. Well, it just reduces the stress level.
Yes, exactly.
That's the main gain at the end of the day.
Yes, and talking about stress level, they add a big improvement in the policy is they talk a lot about vulnerable people. They put it forward. So if your product is designed for vulnerable people, it has to be treated as category 1. So regardless if you're category 2A or 2B, you have to treat it as a category 1 because vulnerable people are the most at risk. So it's really the responsibility of the manufacturer to think who will eat their product. So if you think about who will eat it, if you sell your products for retirement homes or hospitals, that's vulnerable people. But the clear definition in the policy is people with weakened immune system, pregnant people, and adults of 60 and more. So you really have to think of who will eat it, and then you apply the policy. If you are category 2A, 2B, you still have to do your sampling plan as you are category 1.
Exactly. I think it's the best example of, yes, now in this new policy, there's more exemption, but also there's more responsibility. And that's the best example here where we retarget what's the vulnerable people. We're talking about if you voluntarily, let's say, sell to let's say, a hospital or retirement home, but also if you do a campaign that you have a great product for pregnant people, a great product for elderly, well, you really target those people. And so you need to quality-wise address that, and really it's zero tolerance. Like there's no buffer for this type of product since you really address a more sensible population there.
Yeah, so I think it's a great addition. But you still have to, every producer needs to think of what you're producing and who you're selling with. That's everything is based on that.
Exactly.
But we still have a few more questions because we saw a bit of ambiguities because we are not sure we understand why. So, for example, the microgreens and sprouts are now excluded from the policy. and they were category 1 because they're supporting the growth of Listeria. They come from soil, so the possibility of having Listeria might be bigger. So we're not sure we understand why it's been excluded.
Yeah, it's quite, let's say, mind-boggling for the time being. We've asked a couple of CFIA inspector 2 weeks ago about this new change. They were not briefed yet on how to apply the policy regarding microgreens and sprout. But yes, it's a product that will be normally category 1 of risk, and then one day over the other, you would just
completely excluded.
Exactly. So there's still clarification to be made from the CFIA on how would it apply to those type of producer, and at the end of the day, like, we're just hoping that the producer will keep their control in place because the risk doesn't disappear with a new policy.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. There's also, as a microbiologist, one of the ambiguities that have been asked a lot, and let's say scientific wise, the difference between 100 CFU program with 0.5 logs, because basically it's a kind of the same criteria. The 100 CFU program is really more a standard in terms of operation, what you can really detect on the food product. But when you're doing a challenge test, you need to inoculate between 10 to 30, and a 0.5 log basically bring you back to 100 CFU program. So it's kind of two data, but the same result at the end of the day. So it's always hard to determine, okay, so which one do we take? I think from any people who've done a challenge test, I think the best criteria is really to focus on the 0.5 log more than the 100 CFU program. But like the two data, it's present like a two different, let's say, standard, but at the end of the day, it's the same result that you get when you're doing a challenge test. Another ambiguity that we flagged on this policy is we've talked about it, any product ready-to-eat food with a shelf life of 5 days or less.
Yes.
So once again, typically those products were made by grocer, caterer, restaurant that would put they would put a 5 days or less of shelf life, but now these businesses are out of the policy.
Yes.
So it's kind of a criteria that stayed in the policy but isn't applicable to any really rare.
We're still searching for that. So if you have any example, please feel free to comment.
Exactly. And like we've excluded grocery, but if we look just a little a couple of years back, there was a huge incident of Listeria in ready-to-eat products that were made by a grocery. It causes 6 cases of listeriosis and 1 death related to that type of contamination. So once again, it's a good example of, yes, you can be out of policy, but the risk is still there and you need to address the risk. So I think if there's one thing to really take away at this point, responsibility.
Yes, responsibility. Yes, exactly. I love that.
And if we go to our concluding remarks, so once again, just as the disclaimer, so it's really our professional take on it. If you have a really specific answer, we'll be more than happy to answer it. But at the end of the day, the real person who's going to apply the policy is your CFIA inspector. The policy will come into effect on October 1st, 2023. So pretty soon, we've got a couple of months to adjust to this, the application of this law. Yeah,
and we'll have the webinars from the CFIA that will happen that will help you to understand the policy. And at the end of the day, the thing you need to understand and remember is that it is a responsibility of the businesses to properly manage their HACCP plan and demonstrate their risk level. So if you need help with that, BeWist with our experts with that, so we can help you with your HACCP plan or your risk level. So feel free to contact us. And the other thing that I think is the most important is that it opens doors to new technologies.
Exactly. That's the part that we love on our side at Innodal. It's really that it's not only thermal process that makes, let's say, the safety of the product. Now it's whatever type of technology that you're using, if you're able to prove efficacy, it opens the door to new innovation, to be able to explore new possibility in the food processing business. So to implement new ways to process the product. It brings back, once again, the responsibility on the shoulder of the manufacturer, but in a good sense, because now, just show that you're in control, and then, that's what we want to see, basically, that your responsibility and you know what you're doing. Yeah,
we love that, actually, because every producer needs to take responsibility of their own products. I love it, actually.
Definitely. So that's good thing that, let's say, less favorable thing with this new policy, but if there's one thing, it's really a responsibility. That's a great thing.
Yeah, great thing. I think so.
Absolutely. So thank you everyone for being with us. If you have any other question, please contact us. It will be a pleasure to respond to your question. If you at Innodal, so once again, we supply an anti-Listeria processing aid that you can apply on all type of food products. So since it's a processing aid, you don't need to label it in your list of ingredients. It's a great product for any category 1 that want to change from category 2B also, but also for any category 2B that are exporting a product that needs to be at around 0 in terms of exportation. And we have a laboratory in Quebec City that does all that challenge studies. So if you need to provide data, our microbiology team will be more than happy to help you with that.
And for us, we, as I said, we are HACCP. We can do your HACCP plan. We can do your preventive controls. We can do internal audit. We can help you as a technical support in the development of scientific validation. So clearly feel free to contact us. We can help you with a lot of things.
Great. Thank you, Laurence.
Thank you, Laurent.
And thank you everyone for being with us.
Thank
It's been a real pleasure.
Yes.